A few years ago, they were building a church building in York from scratch, from the ground up. And it was for all the churches in York to use. So they got all of the ministers together and said, right, we've got this plot of land. We can do it completely from scratch. We can design a church exactly as you want it. So they all got together, these ministers, and talked it all over about what it was. And then when the building was opened and they had the first service there, when people walked in, there was only one row of seats, and it was just at the back, like that. And so the first set of people sat down, and then that row of seats just went boom and rocketed to the front, like that, you see. Amazing, isn't it? Brilliant. Here we go. Given all the options, why would someone choose Jesus? Okay? If you go into a bookshop now, you will see walls and walls of self-help and spirituality, often written by celebrities who are famous for something else and not for having a theology degree or a philosophy degree, but for having, big lips or something like that. And so it's weird. It's weird. The world has become obsessed again with there must be something out there. There must be more to life than just this, okay? And then you've got to pick your worldview, you pick your philosophy, and you throw yourself into it. And according to the people who write these books, you'll then get rich, which of course is what it's all about. So if there are all these options there, then why, in this giant pick and mix, would someone pick out Jesus? Well, I want to make one point in general, first of all, which is this. Apologetics, you may know this word, you may not. Apologetics is the discipline of being able to defend and explain the Christian faith against people who say it's not true. Okay, apologetics. And a lot of churches, sadly, just don't do it. Apologetics isn't on their radar because they just say, that's for really clever people sitting in ivory towers. It's not for anyone else, okay? Being able to defend Christianity against attacks is not something that we really do in a church. They can do it in some Bible college somewhere. But you see, apologetics goes sideways and it goes downwards. It's everybody. And so I want to show you a little note that my younger daughter wrote when she was about 6. And I found it on her bedroom floor. And this is what it says. Sometimes I feel like God isn't real. And sometimes I feel like God is real. A few days ago, I asked my dad, is God real? And my dad said, he is real. So there you go. Okay? Now that is apologetics, okay? And as she gets older, I will be able to give her more information, okay? But I don't have to be a university professor to do it. I just have to be a dad to do it because it's part of my calling. And so apologetics is for everyone. So if we're saying, okay, given all the options out there, why would you pick Jesus? We better go through what the options are. And you might think, well, hang on a second, I was planning on going home at some point today, right? There's too many options. But I want to introduce you to a truly remarkable lady. This is Professor Mary Poplin. She is very nearly Mary Poppins, but not quite. Okay, Professor Mary Poplin. She is astonishing. And if you read some of her books, you'll discover that for yourself. Because you name it, she's tried it. She has worked her way through every book on the self-help bookshelf. She has thrown herself into every answer that anyone has ever given for what's the meaning of life and how am I supposed to live a good life, okay? And I'm not going to go into details, but some of the things that she got involved in are shocking, genuinely shocking. And she tells her story as you need to hear it. And not only did she throw herself into all kinds of different lifestyles, some of which were very, very messy, every time she did it and tried some new thing, she wouldn't just get involved, she would begin a school and teach it to other people. She's basically taught people through almost every kind of expression of human living you can imagine. And then one day, she found Jesus. And she became a Christian. And she said, this is what I was looking for the whole time when I tried all of these other things. And now I found it. She wrote a book about that called Is Reality Secular? Okay, and it's a hard read, not because it's badly written, it's a hard read because there's difficult stuff in there. Because she went down a lot of very depressive routes and got herself into some real difficult situations. But God is using her, and one of the ways that God is using her is this. She has made life a lot simpler. She says this, look, I simply distill worldviews at their most basic level into 4. We can do 4, can't we? Right? We might not be able to do the big bookshelf, but we can do 4. She says, in the end, they might all have different names, and they might have little buzzwords that are different, and people might dress differently, but in the end, there are really only 4 things that you can believe about the world. There are really only 4 ways to live. And she says they are material naturalism, secular humanism, pantheism, and monotheism. There isn't anything else. There's 4 options out there. And she says, it's generally possible to trace all philosophies and theories and even most practical actions back to one or more of these 4. So if there are only 4 options out there, and they just get packaged and repackaged and dressed up in different ways, then it's probably going to be very helpful if we know what those 4 are. So I'm going to give you an overview of what each one of them is. So here we go. First one, material naturalism. Okay, they're long words, they've got isms in, but it isn't as complicated as it might look. What is the philosophy, the worldview, the lifestyle of material naturalism? Well, it is that there is just stuff and there is nothing else. Okay? So the whole of reality consists of particles and waves, and that's it. There isn't anything else. Okay? So there's protons, and there's neutrons, and there's electrons, and there's quarks, and there's hadrons and mesons. I'm a particle physicist. I'll stop there. But there's a bunch of particles. Okay? And then there's waves, like light rays, and radio waves, and X-rays. But there isn't anything else. That's it. That's all there is in the whole universe. Okay? There's nothing else. Well, what does that really mean? What, under material naturalism, is the meaning of life? And the answer is, there isn't one. There isn't meaning, because meaning would be something extra. But there isn't anything extra. There's atoms, and there's waves, and there isn't anything extra. Anybody who claims that they have got some kind of meaning is mistaken. They are just making it up. They are living some kind of illusion, self-generated illusion, but there isn't actually any meaning. At some point, your atoms are not going to be arranged in a body anymore. They're going to be somewhere else. Okay? That's it. What's the higher power? What's the higher power? The source of all of this, the guider of all of this, the foundation of all of this? Well, there just isn't one. There's only particles and waves. Stop asking about these other things. They don't exist. Okay? And then what happens when you do die? Well, just nothing. Okay? That's it. There is no more life. Okay? If you're lucky, in fact, it's almost guaranteed, at some point, an atom that was in your body is going to be in someone else's body. That's a lovely thought, isn't it? Most of the atoms in your body now were in somebody else's body at some point in the past. Every time we breathe in at least one atom that Julius Caesar breathed out. Okay? And you can prove that. It's just a diffusion of gas laws. Okay? But that is material naturalism. And there's nothing else to it. All right, well, what about the second one? Secular humanism. Secular Humanism. What does this mean? Well, this is for people who kind of believe material naturalism but don't like it. And so what they do is they say, yes, it is true that there's only atoms and waves, okay? It is true there's only atoms and waves. But isn't it amazing that somehow these atoms and waves have combined to bring about life? And isn't it amazing that we're alive? And isn't it amazing that there's ice cream? And so what we should do is eat ice cream and enjoy it and make the most of it and be nice to each other and enjoy ourselves, okay? So what's the meaning of life? Well, this time there is a meaning. It's enjoyment, okay? And this is way more positive than the first one that was like, well, there isn't any meaning, okay? This time you get ice cream. And higher power? Well, okay, look, let's not get carried away. There still isn't one. There isn't anything else. There's atoms, there's waves. Sometimes they make people, sometimes they make ice cream, but there isn't a higher power. It's just a massive fluke that we're here. But we've got to try and make the most of it. Because when we die, that is it. No more ice cream. Okay? So that's secular humanism. Okay, what's pantheism? Well, it's actually quite difficult to say what pantheism is. And that is because nobody really knows what it is, especially people who are pantheistic. It will often have some kind of vague idea of oneness. The universe is some kind of unity. Everything's connected to everything else. Okay? And we should be aiming for togetherness. And what happens is that things can emerge out of the oneness, right? Like you have emerged out of the oneness, but one day you'll be reabsorbed back into the oneness. And you think, well, I can't get a handle on it, and that's because you can't get a handle on it, right? It is vague. Okay? What's the meaning of life? Well, it is generally some kind of, you're trying to achieve some kind of enlightenment. That somehow your understanding of this oneness, your understanding of this connection is going to complete what you were always supposed to be in the first place, which is part of everything, connected to everything. And if you can reach the right level, if you can reach the right level of enlightenment, then that is the purpose of your existence. And often in many cases, enlightenment comes packaged with you no longer existing anymore. Because you've realized that the self is some kind of a temporary state, temporary illusion, but really what your belonging is in the wider whole, okay, about connecting. Is there a higher power? Well, again, slightly tricky to answer. Yes, there is. The higher power is everything, okay? The higher power is the universe, and everything in the universe is all the higher power. But at the same time, there's kind of not a higher power, because there's no consciousness. The universe is not like a being with its own individual consciousness. Right? So it's all very messy and confusing that there kind of is a higher power and there also isn't. And then when you die, oneness. Can't say much more than that. It's vague, okay? Oneness. Or if you don't successfully achieve oneness, maybe another go at it. So you come back in some other form, and then you again you emerge again, and then you try to find this oneness, okay? So those are 3 of the 4. And I just want to summarize some issues that pop up in the lives of people who are living according to one or other of those first 3, okay? And here's one. All of those views, in one way or another, have a kind of emptiness that is inherent to them. It's actually part of it, okay? It's built into it. You see, you either are just atoms and not really a person at all, or you're a person, but then you're going to be gone, or you're a person, but you really probably shouldn't be a person, and you should try and deny that personhood and merge back in again. There's like this emptiness. You don't really get to be you, right? You're not really you, and anything that makes you feel like there's something special about you is, in one way or another, an illusion, okay? Morality becomes a problem because there's no real right and no real wrong. Okay? When we think to ourselves that we understand right and wrong, it's just an electrochemical illusion going on in our brains. It just happens to be how the atoms are moving. So we're not connecting to anything that's really right or really wrong. And so it's all very relativistic, or it's illusory. Some versions of panentheism say, for example, that suffering itself is an illusion. Okay? If someone says to you that suffering is an illusion, hit them. And so here, they all put the emphasis on the person to make everything work themselves. Okay? It's all down to you. For you to have any success in life, any enjoyment in life, you are going to have to figure it out. You are going to have to create opportunities. You are going to have to make the most of opportunities. It's all on you. And if your life isn't going very well, guess whose fault it is? It's yours, right? And then finally, they all place quite a low value on human life in comparison to the one that we haven't talked about yet, monotheism. You're just a bundle of atoms. That's not much value. Okay, this chair's a bundle of atoms, right? You're not that special. You think you're an individual, but you're not really an individual. You're just part of this oneness to be sucked back into it again, okay? And so as a result, Mary Poplin says, and I've seen this too, that these often result in some kind of deep depression, deep dissatisfaction, a loss of purpose and meaning and identity. It can be a real struggle. I gave this talk a few years ago, and a guy came up afterwards and he said, I followed different yogis around the world for 40 years. And I would sit at someone's feet and they would give me all their teaching about how to achieve enlightenment. And I would listen and I would do everything that they said. And eventually I'd realize it's not happening. And I'd go to them and I'd say, I've done everything you've said, and I'm not enlightened. And he said they would always say the same thing. You're nearly there. You're nearly there. And so eventually he would give up and go to a different yogi. And he said, and I got so depressed that I became suicidal. Because for 40 years I was being told, you're nearly there, and I couldn't get there. And he said, and then I found Jesus. And everything changed because I'd arrived. Okay? So let's talk about the fourth one then, monotheism, and talk about how Jesus fits into that. You see, because monotheism is actually just the belief that there's one God. There is a God who is distinct from the universe, not made of atoms, not made of waves, but beyond, outside, transcendent. The God who is in charge of everything, okay? And who made everything. And what that does is it makes it possible that there could be coherence and that there could be meaning and there could be purpose. There could actually be a reason that we're here. Because God has designed us and made us, okay? We belong somehow. Someone's in charge somehow. Isn't that wonderful? Because you've got a chance of life making sense, okay? And of there being some real meaning. You've been put here by somebody else and purpose. Now, Judaism and Islam are also monotheistic. So they can also make these kinds of claims of coherence and meaning and purpose, and they do. But Christianity makes an extra claim on top of monotheism, and it says this: God has come to earth. The God who made the whole universe and made us has actually come here. And that is a claim unique to Christianity. Okay? And that is who Jesus was, and that is who Jesus is today. Okay? And so what I want to suggest to you is that Jesus offers a different kind of apologetic. There are scientific apologetics, There are philosophical apologetics. You can sit down and have a good old intellectual argument with somebody. But Jesus offers a different type of apologetic, and it's the type of apologetic that the wall on that bookshop is trying to answer. It's an apologetic for the soul. We and everyone you ever speak to need Jesus. We need Jesus. Everybody you're ever going to have a conversation with needs him. And I want to show you why. Why do they need him? Well, the first thing is this. Jesus has authority. When you watch the news and when people talk to you about the world today, one of the big issues they have is this. Somebody needs to sort it out. We need someone to come and sort it all out. And they put hope in someone, and then what happens? That person is a disappointment. Okay? But Jesus has authority. Look at this story from the Bible. They got up. They drove him, Jesus, out of the town. They took him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built, ready to throw him off the cliff. They were so angry with him that they became murderous as a mob. Okay? A murderous mob of people marching Jesus up to the edge of a cliff, ready to throw him off. And here's the deal. Mobs will do things that no individual would ever do. If there's a bunch of other people that are going to do it too, you will go to an extreme that you would never have gone to on your own. Those people who might not have murdered Jesus on their own would definitely have done it as a group. But what happens next? But he walked right through the crowd and went on his way. Now think about that for a second. Imagine being there. We've got a baying, angry mob. They have marched Jesus right to the edge of the cliff. And then what does he do? He turns around. And he starts looking at people in their eyes. Looking at them in the eyes and walking away from the edge of the cliff. And as he does that, everybody whose eyes he meets is afraid to throw him off the cliff. They part. This is a guy who has so much authority that he can walk through a murderous crowd and they back out of his way. Right? That is what people need. People need someone who has an authority that can overpower the worst things that humanity has to offer. What else can Jesus offer to our soul? Safety. Deep down, what do we want? We want to be safe. We want to know that we're safe. Then people brought little children to Jesus for him to place his hands on them and pray for them. But the disciples rebuked them. Children weren't of any significance in that society. Get them out of the way. They're barely human. Jesus says, let the little children come to me and do not hinder them. Okay? Now, when a child will run towards someone and snuggle into them, that child has made a judgment of character. They have said, I'm safe with this person. And they knew, those kids knew when they saw Jesus that if they were with him, they were going to be safe. And the world needs that. They need someone that they can say, if I come to you, will I be safe? Jesus says yes. What else? He's compassionate. This extraordinary story from the Gospels. John the Baptist has been beheaded. Jesus' best friend, who Jesus grew up with, his cousin. John's disciples came and took his body and they buried it, and then they went and told Jesus. I don't know if you've ever broken the news to someone about someone they love dying. It's horrendous. They've come to Jesus and they've told him, John has been beheaded. And so quite understandably, when Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew. Of course he did. By boat, privately, to a solitary place. To grieve. But that's not the end of the story. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him. When you're grief-stricken, the last thing you want is a crowd. But when they arrive, when Jesus landed and he saw the large crowd, what's his immediate response? He had compassion on them. He's just lost the dearest person to him on the planet, and he had compassion on them. And he healed their sick. Can you imagine tuning into the TV and seeing a world leader like that? Okay? It's an apologetic for the soul. You see, Jesus offers justice and power and victory and righteousness and goodness. Here's a passage from Revelation. I saw heaven standing open, says John, having a vision. I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse, whose rider, Jesus, is called Faithful and True. With justice he judges, and he wages war. He is not going to take any of this evil. He is going to overcome it. His eyes are like blazing fire, and on his head are many crowns. He has a name written on him that no one knows but he himself. He is dressed in a robe dipped in blood, and his name is the Word of God. The armies of heaven were following him, riding on white horses and dressed in fine linen, white and clean. Coming out of his mouth is a sharp sword with which to strike down the cruelty of the nations. He will rule them with an iron scepter. He treads the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God Almighty. And on his robe and on his thigh, he has this name written: King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Yes, Jesus sat little children on his knee. Never make the mistake of thinking that Jesus is only gentle. He is not only gentle. He is almighty. And what will be the result of Jesus' might? Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. That's you. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people. He will dwell with them. They, you, will be his people. God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. And he who was seated on the throne, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, Jesus, says, I am making everything new." That's the meaning of life. Given all of the options out there, why choose Jesus? Well, because the meaning of life is to know Jesus. And the higher power is Jesus. And after death, we get eternity with Jesus. That's why. He has authority, he's safe, he's compassionate, and he is almighty. And we don't have to do it ourselves. He saves us. He says, I've come that they may have life and have it to the full. This is what you were made for. And it's what everybody that you'll ever have a conversation with was made for. He's the way, he's the truth, and he is the life. Amen.